Hey guys, I'm Bella, the Maker Mama boss lady behind Fiber and Fox, and today this is going to be a special video episode covering pattern testing, how to be a pattern tester, what is a pattern tester, how to pattern test for me, and just general pattern test things. This is something that's come up a lot in comments and questions both on Instagram, YouTube, and the like, and I wanted to cover it all pretty in depth. At least speaking out of my own experience in this video. So typically, if you don't know me, I am Bella. Like I said, I'm a crochet designer. I have a crochet podcast here on YouTube, and I also do some knitting, and we usually just talk yarn and what I'm working on and that sort of thing. So if you like fiber content, stick around for that. But basically anything you need to know about me as far as Instagram, the blog, all of my pattern shops, and all that stuff is linked down below the video. There's also going to be a link to a blog post that I actually have my laptop here. I'm going to be referencing it quite a bit because I'm going to be following basically the same format as the blog post, try to make the two line up really well for you. But if you need any more resources or want to reference some of the things that I said here, or maybe pin it to Pinterest, save it for later, go check out the blog post. There's more pictures and stuff in there as far as pattern testing goes. This is something that's come up a lot, so I wanted to make sure I covered it pretty in depth. This might be a little bit of a longer video, but I did want to answer questions that I end up answering a lot via email or like Instagram message. So we're going to be covering pattern testing, both crochet and knitting. Like I said, I'm a crochet designer, and I am someone who has both crochet and knit pattern test for other designers. So I'm going to be speaking out of my own experience. This is definitely something, there's no like one answer as like, what does a pattern test look like? How do you participate in a pattern test? How do you apply for a pattern test? There's no one answer because all different designers run things differently. So I'm going to be speaking out of my own experience for how I've tested for other designers in the crochet and knit community, as well as how I run my own pattern tests. Like I said, I'm a designer. I design garments, shawls, a lot of stuff with indie dyed yarn, and how I run my pattern tests and what I expect out of my testers. So if that sounds like something you are interested in, or just genuinely didn't have any idea what a pattern tester was, this is a great video to check out and save for later. So let's get started. Pattern testing 101. Here we go. So right from the get-go here, let's get a baseline. What is a pattern tester? In case you are unclear, I want to define that for you because I know early on in my crochet designer career, I actually got people who were volunteering. Like I'd put up a tester call, and I got people who I personally knew, so I knew they didn't crochet or knit, who were volunteering to test my pattern. Like they wanted to take pictures wearing it, or like they wanted me to give them a sample of it, like kind of like a brand ambassador type thing. So that's not what a pattern tester is. A pattern tester, so let's say I'm a designer, you're a designer, somebody's a designer, and they've created a design. They've written it up to the very best of their ability. They've polished it up nicely, so it's not like you took notes in a notebook and then took a picture and you're going to send that out to your pattern testers. It is usually a PDF form. It's usually as neat and tidy and the best math and the best punctuation, the very best that the designer could do on their own. So they've polished it up nicely, but it's a draft still. It's not perfect. And typically the designer has only made, if it's something in multiple sizes, maybe they've made one or two sizes, but if it's like a full range garment, the designer has not made all of those sizes. So the math involved usually in grading a pattern for different sizes is just math on paper. So like I know my size fits me, but I need pattern testers to confirm that it is going to fit other bodies based on the math that I think I did correctly. Sometimes patterns go through tech editing first, which is a professionally like contracted like math editor. That person won't actually make the design, but will actually go through the pattern and just pick through it for math and like grammar errors. So sometimes that happens beforehand, sometimes that happens after, sometimes it's both. A lot of this again varies based on the designer and whether they're working on like a project with maybe a publication, a book, a magazine, or working with a yarn company. Stuff's gonna vary. But typically a pattern tester is someone who is going to get the pattern prior to publication. They're going to get it in a draft form. You're going to usually get it, you're usually not the only pattern tester unless it's a really simple pattern. A lot of them are run in groups or maybe in a Facebook group or an Instagram chat or Discord. Like usually there's a group element, at least for what I've experienced. Sometimes it's just they email you as a group and then you email back individually. But again, it all varies. But you're going to get that PDF pattern. Usually you are paying for your own yarn. Sometimes if it's with a yarn company, they may provide some pattern yarn support to some or all of the pattern testers, but typically you are buying your own yarn, you're getting the pattern draft for free, and you are working for free. There may occasionally be some opportunity to be paid as a pattern tester, but for the most part, it is a, for the love of the yarn community, a free gig. The designer needs pattern testers because, like I said, they've mathed out all the sizes, but they need to see it on actual bodies or heads or hands or whatever it fits on, or even if it's just like a blanket size, like does it fit on? Is the math that we did on paper correct? Is it going to turn out the size that we thought it was? So you're going to go through the pattern. You're going to follow it exactly. You're going to use the yarns that the designer has asked, be it weight or very specific yarn like with a company. You're going to do your gauge swatch. You're going to follow through. You're going to test everything on paper unless the designer has given you some freedom and said, hey, you can, have a little modification fun here and there. You're pretty much going to make it as written. Looking for errors, be it in math or in inconsistencies, like, hey, you have half double crochet capitalized over here, but it's lowercase over here. Grammatical errors, like, hey, you forgot, a period at the end of this sentence. Just kind of picking through to the best of your ability. Again, you're unpaid. It's a volunteer gig, but to the very best of your detail-oriented abilities. I'm sorry, I'm really excited about this video, and I know there's a lot of content, so I'm talking a little fast. I'll try and slow down. To the very best of your ability. You're going through the pattern and you're making it in whatever size and yarn and whatnot that you've agreed to make it. You're working within the deadlines that the designer has provided, and you're making that thing start to finish, and you're usually providing feedback of some kind, be it on a form or an email. Again, varies designer to designer. Some feedback on how it turned out, what you thought of the pattern, stuff like difficulty level and any errors that you may have found, changes that you made, would have made, could have made. And usually photos are involved. That can be a huge part as well. I know for me, that's something that I really look for in pattern testers is photo quality. I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit. But photos, because you're not only representing that, hey, you actually made this thing and it proves to the designer that you made it and it actually looks like they intended it to, and they can tell, like, yeah, you did your gauge swatch because that does fit you beautifully and it's all proportioned right and that sort of stuff. But that's also going to go out whether you're posting it on your social media or the designer's reposting it or sending it out in emails or blog posts or putting it up on Ravelry or whatever. You're helping to promote that pattern, because me, as a designer, there's only one of me. I don't have paid professionals right now who are modeling or anything for me, so it's a really big deal to have other people representing that pattern in different sizes, different skin tones, different even like yarn choices and yarn budgets. It's a big deal to be able to promote that pattern so that other people can see themselves in it and see their stash in it, and just help that pattern gain traction, be it on social media or Ravelry, or just kind of open it up to an audience that the designer themselves might not have. So that is kind of a summary of what a pattern tester is. So excited about this video. It's been a long time coming. But we're going to get into some more of the nitty-gritty as far as what's expected, and as well as how you could be a pattern tester for me or your favorite designers. So a question I get asked a lot is, how do I pattern test for you? How do I know about your pattern test? How do I apply to be a tester? Right now I'm filming this in end of September of 2021. If ever there's any changes to how I do tester calls, I'll try to remember to link it below this video and make that information available to you there. So double check if you're watching this far in the distant future. But as of right now, I'm going to tell you how I do pattern tester calls, as well as some common ways that other designers might be doing tester calls as well, if you want to be involved in those. So for me, I usually, as of right now, my biggest pool for pulling testers is on Instagram. So typically when I'm designing something, I'll start doing sneak previews a little bit before the design is in a place where it would be ready for tester calls. Some designers don't do previews at all and just like day of, or like, and pattern testers now, because they don't like to put the design out there, but I like to kind of build suspense a little bit and gain some traction and get people excited about the tester call and the upcoming pattern. So usually I will do a couple posts leading up prior, and then I will do a post that links you, I'll usually do it in my stories and in my feed, links you over to a Google form. And there I typically have information about the difficulty level of the pattern, the yarns that I used or what yarns you're going to need to use, yardages, sizing. I include measurements in case it's unclear like what a size large is numerically. I have information about the timeline that you're going to be working on, and then I have some questions about like, have you pattern tested before? Who have you tested for? In previous pattern tests, were you able to deliver on X, Y, and Z? Have you put projects on Ravelry? Are you comfortable trying to put projects on Ravelry? Are you familiar with swatching? Stuff like that. I try to be pretty thorough and ask a lot of questions up front so that you don't sign up and then didn't realize what you were signing up for as far as commitment. So I try to give you the information up front. And it is an application, so it's not like a sign-up sheet. It's an application. I do later go through and pick testers that would be the most appropriate based on my feelings for that particular design, be it size ranges or whatever. And then I usually, right now, I will also send out that Google form to my email list, and my Instagram and my email list are linked down below. So if you want to join that and be in the know about tester calls, that is the best place to do it. Sometimes I remember to post them here on YouTube as well. I definitely talk about pattern tests and new designs in my podcast. So if you want to kind of have a lot of sneak previews, that's a great place to be looking out in the podcast. But generally, being on my mailing list is probably the most sure thing. But if you want all the sneak previews and whatnot, Instagram is a good place for that. So that's how I do tester calls. Like I said, I will go through each of those. It's usually like I put it up on a Friday, and then by Monday or Tuesday, I've selected people and emailed the people that I need. But usually there's a deadline on the application. It's only open for a couple days, and then I go through and pick the best options for that test as I see fit. Some testers or some designers have a exclusive, like you apply one time and then you're part of a tester pool that they email separately. I may get to that point, but I like to kind of have a mix of newer and older testers. I don't mean age-wise. I mean like you've tested for me before and I know you did a great job, and you're a newer tester, but it seems like you would do a great job. So I tend to have a mix of both people who've worked with me before and people who haven't. So that's why I don't have an exclusive email list of people I've already worked with. Some people do that. Again, it depends on the project. For me, I don't generally have designs that are like a big secret collab or like I don't want out there. Sometimes pattern tests are run as a secret and you're not going to be posting pictures about it and you're not going to be talking about it until the designer gives you the say-so on that. Typically, I am all about like you post that whole time, you amp up that design as much as you want. But some are secretive, so they have like secret email groups or secret Facebook groups, and you don't talk about it with anybody. You don't show it on your podcast. It's very hush-hush. But that's probably not the most common. Some people also have a Facebook group that they would work with, kind of like the email list, where you've been added before or you've applied before and the designer has okayed you as someone that they'd want to work with, and then you're in the Facebook group, so they'd like post a link and be like, hey, I need these sizes, and then maybe it's first come, first serve. Maybe they're still picking through those applications. It definitely depends. And I've not worked with any publications, so I can't speak to how that works with like books or I think a lot of times magazines, they will have their own testers if they're going to test things. But again, it can vary. Another way that people do it is maybe an Instagram just first come, first serve sign up. Like I need 6 people to test this pattern and whoever signs up first is the tester. I prefer, one, because I have control issues, I will say it up front. I prefer to go through the applications and actually pick because like I'm really picky. I do like to give a lot of people maybe I haven't worked with before a chance. And I mean, that's at one point, all of my pattern testers I had never worked with before. And I found some amazing people. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I like to pick who I'm going to be working with on that particular design based on some of the criteria that I'm going to go through below here, but everybody does it differently. And if you don't get picked the first time, don't be discouraged, because a lot of times designers are getting a large pool of people to choose from. And if they don't pick you one specific time, it might not be that you're a horrible crocheter and no one likes you. Like, don't get discouraged and never try again. If you are somebody that knows your craft and is able to take half decent photos and has some attention to detail, like you probably would be a pretty good pattern tester. So do apply again. Don't get discouraged. A lot of times, like, I don't get hundreds of people, but I'm sure there's designers that are getting tons and tons of responses. So they can't pick everybody. It's not possible to give out that many patterns for free, and they don't need that much feedback because that would be a pain to go through. So just keep trying, and yeah, just keep putting yourself out there. And if pattern testing is something that you really want to take part in, find a way to make sure that you get to do that. I wanted to mention too that if you're not sure how to find pattern tests, like how do you find this? There are sometimes Facebook groups that you can join that aren't like a secret private thing, that people will do a call in those groups. I've gotten mixed results with those, both in working with designers and working with testers. A lot of times it seems like people join those groups to get free patterns and then ghost. Like, they're like, oh yeah, I'll test your pattern. You send them the pattern and then you never hear from them again. Don't love that. But it's something you can be on the lookout for. I can't think of any groups off the top of my head, but if you search like crochet pattern tests or knit pattern testers or something, I'm sure you will find a Facebook group, because there's a Facebook group for everything. And a lot of times there's very specific rules. I'd go for the ones that are the most structured, and just look through, be cautious of what you're signing up for and who you're signing up for with, and like giving out personal information in Facebook groups and whatnot. But also you can follow hashtags like hashtag pattern testers wanted, crochet pattern test, knit pattern test, pattern tested needed, pattern testers, pattern test, that sort of thing on Instagram if you're interested in seeing these come up in your feed. But you're maybe not like set on one designer, which is kind of a good way to start too, because if you're like fixated on, I want to test for Caitlin Hunter, chances are her slots are pretty full. But if you have a broad pool of people that you're following on Instagram and kind of keep an eye out for, there's probably more likelihood that you will see a pattern test in the timeline that you need to see it, and that you'll be able to sign up and maybe possibly get selected. Now I want to cover what is going to be expected of a pattern tester. I've, hinted at it throughout the earlier part of the video, but I want to kind of break down the basic, typical expectations of a pattern tester. So for one, you're going to need to be able to make exactly to pattern, unless the designer has given you some wiggle room, exactly as written the pattern at the required skill level called for. So this means if you just learned how to knit last week, you probably shouldn't sign up or volunteer to test a oversized cabled fingering weight sweater. And this is not to say that newer makers, both knit and crochet, can't pattern test. You absolutely can. If it's a pattern that's geared towards like my first baby blanket or my first pair of socks or a beginner level sweater, pay attention. Usually I always make sure to list the skill level that I think the pattern is. You can always give feedback in the test itself, but a general what I think the skill level is, some of the skills that are going to be required to complete the pattern test. So if you look at an application or just pattern test description on Instagram or something, and all of the things sound completely like you've never heard of them before, it's probably not the pattern test you should apply for, because it's not, well, it is a great way to learn some new skills and maybe try out a new stitch, or maybe you've never steeped something before, or maybe you've never done a bottom-up garment. Like, it's okay if you haven't done that thing, but if you haven't done any of the things, pattern testing is probably not where you need to be right now. If you're new to the craft, you probably should follow some patterns. It's a great idea to have followed patterns before you do pattern testing, because then you know how to read a pattern. You know the basic abbreviations. You know how to make sure you have the attention to detail to read step by step and not skip parts. So you do need to be able to read patterns and work at whatever level is going to be required for that pattern. Sometimes there's some wiggle room. There are some designers who design garments based on like putting in your own measurements. So would fit any size, fit it to yourself. So there's going to be a little less precision in like row counts or whatever. But in general, you're going to be following step by step in the pattern as written and not making changes. So if you are a person who generally follows patterns and skips parts or is like, I don't like that edging, I'm gonna put in a different edging. That's not how pattern tests work usually. Typically you need to follow exactly what's in there because the designer is looking for feedback on that pattern as written. So do keep in mind that you need to be able to make that thing like the designer asked you to. And if ever at any point you are stuck or you aren't understanding, like speak up sooner rather than later. It's okay to have questions. That is part of the testing process, usually whether you're in a group or just emailing back and forth with the designer individually or whatever, however they've laid it out. But if you have a question, bring it up because it might actually be an error in the pattern. And sometimes it's maybe you're just not, it's written right and you're not understanding it. It's okay to ask questions, but if you are a beginner, don't sign up for an advanced pattern test because that's just going to be a disservice to the designer and it's going to be frustrating for you. So challenge your skills maybe a little bit, but not like way, way out of your normal range. Hope that makes sense. For pattern tests, you're also typically going to have to use the required yarn or required yarn weight. This can vary a lot. For my pattern tests, typically, unless even when I have worked with like indie dyers as collaboration, I don't require that you use that yarn because I understand that budget, or maybe if you're international, it wouldn't make sense for you to ship from somebody in like New York. So usually there's wiggle room on what yarn you work with, but if it's a sweater designed in a DK weight yarn, you're not going to be able to test it in bulky. If it's a hat that's fingering weight, you're not going to be able to make it in worsted weight. For the pattern test. You are welcome to purchase patterns on your own afterwards and make modifications as long as you don't claim it as your own design. And, change out borders and change out yarns and sub in stripes where there's no stripes. But generally for a pattern test, there's going to be a required either yarn that everyone is using. Sometimes if it's a collaboration, like maybe with Lion Brand or something like that, or a publication for like a yarn line book. That didn't make any sense, but if there's a specific yarn that will be listed usually in the application, like you must use this yarn, you must use this color of this yarn, this whatever. Usually though, for most pattern tests, it's that you need to use this weight of yarn. And if you aren't familiar with yarn weights, there are lots of resources out there. I'm going to have a blog post coming up soon, and in the future I'll try to remember to link it down below this video, of the different yarn weights and the abbreviations, and because it gets really confusing, like what is a 4-ply, what is worsted weight, what is sport, what is the numbers, and what's a number 5, and all of that. It can be very confusing, so if you're not sure, look it up. But usually you're going to make the item in whatever weight is required, unless it's you can make it in any size, any yarn kind of pattern. Usually it's the designer has done the math for that gauge, that yarn, and that's what you're gonna make it in. Typically, like I said, testers are buying their own yarn. I am not particular on whether you work with the dyer that I'm using or if you use yarn from your stash. A lot of times I'm like, hey, you want to throw a stripe in there, whatever, as long as you can provide me with a yardage. But just pay attention to what's required and stick to that. Another thing that is really important, like I said, is yardage. This is something I totally did not know how to do when my first pattern test. I had no idea. I was like, I used 3 balls of yarn, and the balls were, 357 yards. But I don't know how much yarn I actually used. And I honestly thought people were taking out a yardstick and measuring this is how many yards I have left, so therefore I use this many or something. No. I do have a blog post on how to measure or how to weigh yarn, for how much yardage you've used, how much yardage you have left, and even some tips on how to calculate yardage for sizes and whatnot. But if you're not familiar with that, usually it just involves I actually took my scale down. It's in the other room. I usually have a kitchen scale that I use for weighing yarn up there. But it usually involves a scale of some kind, typically a kitchen or a postal scale. They're pretty cheap on Amazon and whatnot. And being able to read your yarn labels and being able to do a little bit of conversions based on how many yards per gram and all of that. Because the designers are going to typically need yardage info, especially if it's something in a like sized garment or maybe a hat that comes in different sizes or something that sizes. They want to be able to put in their pattern that to make the 2XL you need this much yarn, and to make the extra small you need this much yarn. And those are never exact numbers, but they do need something in there, so people have something to go off of when they're purchasing their yarn. So always pay attention to what yarn is listed, and if you have questions, you can always message the designer before committing to the pattern test. So if you're not sure, like, do I have to buy that yarn that she bought? Do I have to make it the same color? Can I add stripes? Like that kind of thing. Ask that beforehand before you commit. But just know that you are going to have to stay within some sort of yarn parameter usually. Right up there with importance as far as what yarn you use, you're going to need to pay really careful attention most of the time, unless it's a doesn't matter what size this comes out kind of pattern, to gauge and swatching and possibly blocking as well. This again will vary designer to designer, but for me, I definitely, if I design a garment or even a shawl, I want to know that the math that I've done for if I start with this many stitches and do this many rows and whatever, the shaping, yada yada, that if you follow that, you will end up with an item that is the size that it says it's going to be in the pattern. Because you don't want people frustrated with, like, they thought they were going to have this beautiful sweater and it doesn't fit. Or you're making it as a gift and it comes out ridiculously too small or too big or whatever. So making it not only to pattern, everybody is different. We're not machines. So even if you use the exact same yarn that I did and the exact same hook, and follow everything to pattern, it might not come out the same size if you don't do a gauge swatch. So if you're not familiar with what a gauge swatch is, real quick, there's definitely other resources out there. I may cover it in my own video at some point. A gauge swatch it gives us a gauge of how close our tension, the way we crochet or knit, is to how the designer crochets and knits. We're all different. So even with the same tools and the same yarn, people hold things differently. People have different levels of stress. People sit differently when holding things. The weather is different. There's many things that play into gauge, but your 8 stitches might not come out the same size as my 8 stitches. So basically, a gauge swatch is like how you level yourself with matching that designer. So usually it'll be like, I don't know. I think my most recent pattern is like 21 stitches by 15 rows is 4 inches by 4 inches. Usually it's like a 4 by 4 type square situation, which I think is 10 by 10 centimeters. I could be completely wrong on that. But there's usually some standard, and it's usually at the beginning of the pattern, and it's very important that you are able to meet that gauge if you want the item to come out as, if it says it's going to come out to be a 32-inch bust, you gotta do that gauge swatch so that you make sure your sweater comes out that size. Gauge definitely doesn't matter as much on some patterns. I know I've done wall hangings and stuff like that where it's like, if it's bigger or smaller, that's totally fine on you. But if it's a garment or an accessory like a hat or sock or something, you definitely want it to fit. So being able to do a gauge swatch, it's a big pain. Nobody likes it. It's not fun. To sit and do that calculation, be able to get gauge. I do want to put some resources out there as far as gauge, but I would encourage you to look up how to do a proper knit gauge swatch, how to do a crochet gauge swatch, how to gauge swatch in the round versus flat. That kind of stuff is important to know because it does make a really big difference in getting gauge. Whether or not the swatch needs to be blocked, wet blocked, steam blocked, isn't blocked. Those are the stuff that you need to be paying attention to when pattern testing, because you're trying to replicate as close as possible to what the designer was able to make gauge-wise. And sometimes there's requirements as well for blocking the finished item. Blocking is usually where you either steam something with like an iron or a steamer to kind of bring it into shape, or soaking it. I have a wet blocking tutorial that you can go check out as well if you're not familiar with that. I can't put all the info in this video, but blocking is pretty common, especially with garments or maybe something that has like lace in it, like a shawl, because you want the finished dimensions to be as perfect and beautiful as possible, so there may be blocking required. Just pay attention to that kind of stuff, because there's a huge difference in a swatch that you measured unblocked versus a swatch that you did block. There's a big difference in, oh, my garment's too small. Well, did you block it like the designer said? That kind of stuff. So pay attention to swatching and blocking and gauge. Not in that order. Always pay attention to gauge first, because there's really no point in testing if you're not able to replicate what it is that the designer had in mind. Another thing that's going to be super important for pattern testing is that you're able to work within the required deadlines. Those are usually given up front, and it may vary on time length depending on the designer. And even if you tested for that designer before, don't assume that it's the same length as last time. It's going to vary design to design and collaboration to collaboration, all of that stuff. So just take a look at your calendar and give yourself some buffer room, because you're going to need to maybe order yarn and it might take a while to get there, or you're going to have to block something and you're going to have to do your swatches and maybe it's going to take you a couple tries, or maybe next weekend you have that big barbecue and maybe you're not going to have time to work that kind of stuff. So do look at your schedule and make sure that you're actually going to have time to make that thing in the required time. Usually for me, if it's a garment, it's going to be like 6 to 10 weeks depending on yarn weight. I do size inclusive patterns, so I want to give everybody a chance to not have to work their fingers to the bone to get the thing done, but also get it done in a timely manner that I can release it when it needs to be released, that sort of thing. And usually designers are very understanding if a serious life event comes up. Like, you're working for free for designers and no one is like contracting you down and going to come hunt you down if you don't finish the pattern test. But do make sure that if you are agreeing to do it, that you, to the best of your knowledge, are going to be able to. Don't sign up for a pattern test if you're moving next weekend, or you're about to have a baby in 2 weeks or something like that, or like generally you never have time to crochet, so why would you have time for a pattern test? Look at the deadlines, and if something does come up and you are able to contact the designer, I understand, like if a major life event occurs, like your main priority is not going to be getting on Instagram and contacting some crochet designer. Totally get that. Especially within the last year and so, stuff's been weird. Stuff comes up. People get sick. People have had job circumstances change and stuff like that. Kids at home doing school, that sort of stuff. It's been weird. So if you're not going to be able to complete the pattern test and you are able to contact that designer, please do like as soon as you possibly can. Don't wait to the end of the test to be like, oh, hey, by the way, I never did any of it. Because that's really frustrating if they're counting on you for photos or yardage information or whatever, or the group was counting on your feedback, that kind of stuff. You did commit to something, so do try to your very best of your ability to get that done. Put reminders in your phone whenever you need to do. Some designers also may have deadlines within the main deadline. It's not something that I do, but I can think of a few designers off the top of my head that are like, by week 1, you need to have gotten your yarn. By week 2, you need to have swatched and completed, the front panel of the sweater, or and they might not be like hard deadlines, but they're like check-in points. So do look at the dates that are in there and make sure that they're going to work within your schedule. Worth mentioning real quick, make sure you pay attention to any other specific requirements that may come up, pattern test to pattern test. I mentioned before that like maybe it's a secret pattern test, so like please don't post about it on Instagram, it's a secret, or stuff like that. Just pay attention, read those emails that go out with the pattern test or the application very carefully so you can make sure to follow through on whatever it is that the designer and that group is expecting from you. Something that is of huge importance to me for my designs is photos. You're gonna need to usually submit some kind of photos. This again varies. For me, it's typically I ask you to submit at least 2 photos, and if it's something that can be worn, that it is worn, or that you show that thing like a wall hanging or whatever in a wall hanging habitat. Basically that you show off that thing doing what it is supposed to be doing. So if it's a hat, show it on your head or somebody's head or something. It's going to, again, vary, but you have to remember that pattern testers are not only providing feedback, but you're usually a huge part of marketing that pattern. So putting photos out there that are actually going to sell patterns is really important. Now, hear me out. I am not saying in any way, shape, or form that you need to have professional camera gear, or that you need to be a trained photographer, or that you need to hire a photographer, or that you need to be like a social media influencer, or that you need to, look like a social media influencer and have a picture perfect, flawless face and body. That is not what I'm saying by good photos. Hang with me here. But it is really important that the photos are well lit, that the background is clean, that you can tell what that item is, and it's not like you quick snapped a picture of a sweater on your bathroom floor and your cat was walking on it and then you submitted that as like, hey, here's my finished photo. Ultimately, my goal as a designer is to sell patterns. I do love being part of this community. I do love working with people. I do love making crocheted stuff. But ultimately, as a designer, gotta sell the patterns. So having photos, in addition to the ones that I take myself, that represent that design is really important to me. So you have to think that what you're submitting for photos, putting them on Ravelry or posting them to your social media or giving them to the designer themselves to use on their blog, their emails, wherever those photos are going to end up, you're selling that pattern. So try to the very best of your ability. Again, you don't have to be a pro, but pretty much all of us at this point have a phone that takes decent photos, or maybe a point and shoot camera or something. Up until now, I've been taking pretty much all of my pattern photos on my phone. So you can definitely do that, and I take all my photos myself. I do not have anyone doing photo shoots for me. Occasionally, I have asked my husband Jojo to take something, but pretty much I take them all myself. I do have a tripod, and I do have a Bluetooth like remote that hooks to both my camera and my phone, so I'm able to casually put my hand down by my side and tuck my arm behind me and take some photos that look like I have my hand on my hip. Try to hide the remote as best I can, but I do take my own photos. It's super helpful if you have somebody that's good at photography, a friend or an Instagram husband or whatever, but you can totally, even without a tripod, and they're pretty cheap on Amazon if you want to get one for your phone or whatever, but it's easy enough to prop it up on something. You can definitely take quality photos without a ton of gear. And as far as editing, there's definitely some free editing software that you can get on your phone. I use Snapseed. I think it's owned by Google, maybe, but it's a really good free editing app. I know a lot of people like Lightroom, and there's other ones out there. If you search like top free editing apps, you can find a lot of info there. But just like brightening stuff up, or maybe sharpening the image, or you don't want to put a bunch of filters on and make it look crazy and weird and whatever. But I don't even know what word that was I just said. I think it was whatever. I'm not sure. But to present a photo to the very best of your ability, that's going to make people say, ooh, I like that. I want to buy that pattern. That's your goal. So over in that blog post that's linked down below this video, I've included several pictures that really stood out to me from testers, and it's not, the only ones. There's been tons. But I picked a couple that really stood out as being gorgeous, well lit, definitely effort put into styling or displaying them, happy looking faces, beautiful backgrounds, just nice quality photos. And to my knowledge, none of them are taken by, professional photographers, just regular everyday pattern testers. And that's a big deal to me. I want it to look awesome, and I want you to look and feel awesome in it. So I'm not asking you to fake it, but I do want people to look at the photos and be like, oh wow, that person looks great in that. It looks great on their body. They look happy, and I want to make that sweater too. That's my goal. And something that's really important to me is not only, because obviously this is me, this is my face. You see this all the time. This is the face that I have, the body that I have, all of that. Right now, I don't work with models or hire anybody. I'm pretty much the face of my brand, and that is something that I'm happy with. I don't love being behind a camera, honestly, which is super funny because here I am. But I do like showing off the pieces that I've made, and I do wear them, in public and feel awesome in them, and I'm very proud of each item that I put out. So I do try to reflect that in my photos. But people get tired of seeing me, and if you don't look exactly like me or have the same body shape as me, you might have a harder time visualizing like, is that sweater gonna look good on me though? So not only do I create the size inclusive patterns, but I do really try hard to find people that are gonna take nice photos and represent. That's my cat. We're on several takes at this point. We're rolling on through. That are going to represent that size range, so that if you don't look exactly like me, you're going to be able to still look and not only see that I have that size available on Ravelry, but like, oh, hey, she looks awesome in it. And she's shaped like me. She's my height. She's my build. It's going to look awesome on me. And something that is also really important, I try to get a broad range of skin tones and hair colors, and even like different I try to not just pull people from the US when I can, internationally if I'm able to, because again, I want to represent like this person looks like me and looks great in that item. I want people to be able to see themselves, and that's a huge part in selling anything, honestly. That's marketing. But I do want people to know that it's going to look awesome on them and they're going to feel great in it. So having testers that represent that well is really important. Even age ranges. I do have a target customer that I kind of aim towards, but I want people to look at the testers and say, oh, hey, she's my age. That actually looks really great on her. I could pull that off too. I could rock that. So those are kind of things that I'm looking for in pattern testers and photos. Like photos are almost as important as the feedback to me. Like maybe that's not the case for every designer, but photos are really, really important to me. I want to be able to share them. They get shared on my Instagram. A lot of times they get shared on my blog and on like the pattern drop videos. I'll put in testers like slideshows so you can see everybody's different yarn choices as well, as another thing that I really like to represent, because I work with indie dyed yarn a lot, but that doesn't mean everybody has to. And even like regionally, it's some stuff's more accessible to other people. Internationally, it's harder to get yarns that I use, but I like to put out a broad range of colors and budgets. So you can say, oh, I have that yarn in my stash, or, oh, she made that and I shop at that store so that I can get that yarn. That kind of stuff is a big deal. So I do look really carefully. When you apply, I look at your Instagram. I ask for your Instagram, and I do want to say, I think the first question, I ask for your email, and then the first question is your Instagram handle, and is it public? And I do get people who go, I feel bad because they go through the whole application and fill everything out, but they don't have a public Instagram. And why that's important to me, at least right now as of recording this, Instagram is a huge platform for me. And even if you fill out all the details, like I've been crocheting for 15 years and I've tested for yada yada and so, and I've always take amazing photos. If I can't see any of that, I'm basing a lot of how I'm choosing people on their Instagram, or sometimes Ravelry, but more often than not, I look at Instagram. Because that's a visual representation of what you've made before, the photos you're able to take, and if you have like crochet or knitting represented on your Instagram at all, I do look that the public account is super important, because if only your mom and your aunt and uncle and your coworkers who don't crochet are going to see your posts because they have to, request to follow you. I am all about privacy. I totally get that. I'm a super private person in like my personal like Facebook, and I don't even have like a personal Instagram account anymore. And I don't share personal details at all online. So I totally get that. But if you do want to do pattern testing, having a public account, you can make a separate account just for fiber arts or whatever, or do it on your personal account, however you want to go about it. But having it public allows other people to search like the hashtag. Like if I do, my latest design is hashtag Fields cardigan, then your post will show up in that hashtag so people can see your finished object, your progress, the yarn you chose, your skin tone, all that stuff, the sizing. So you're going to be there for inspiration. You're going to show up in the hashtags, and it's going to show up to your audience as well. If I look at your Instagram, and I'm not saying you have to have a fiber arts account at all. Like if you have a personal account or account that, you post your kids on, you post your dog on, you post your food on, you went hiking, whatever, all of that. But if I look at your Instagram account and there is not any yarn in sight anywhere at all, and you've never posted a knit photo, you've never posted a crochet photo, you've never posted a picture of yourself wearing anything you've made, I'm probably not going to pick as a pattern tester, because I am looking for people who obviously know how to knit and crochet. That's important to me. So if you're telling me you've been crocheting for 45 years, but you've never posted a picture, I'm iffy on your actual skill level. And that's just me and being a control freak, and I guess judging books by their covers, because that's the only thing I have to go off. I don't know you. So looking at the photos is super helpful. But if you want to have an account and you post other stuff besides crocheting, that's totally fine. I'm not saying it has to be exclusively fiber arts. But like I said, if it's all just pictures of your food and your hikes that you went on, probably not going to be my top pick. And I really love to see people who have, like, it's nice to see, a sweater on a hanger on a wall. But if I see your face wearing a sweater that you made, or even just your face, like, on your Instagram, like that you're comfortable being behind a camera. I do require that if it's a wearable thing that you wear it and show it on your person, because that's so much more helpful than here's a beautiful sweater I made laying on a bed, you know? So having a public account is a big deal, and some people may require as well that you have a Ravelry. I ask that you do a Ravelry page, a project page, as long as Ravelry is accessible to you. I know that it is an issue for some people, and they've, you know, corrected some of the problems and whatnot, but if Ravelry is something that you are able to use, I do ask that you do a project page, because again, it helps the design gain traction. And when people click on that pattern in Ravelry, and you can click on projects and again, see all the yarn choices, see all the different sizes and all the different colors and all the different things. So project pages really help as well. So photos are a super big deal, and just do your best with photos, basically. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be, you know, magazine quality, your best hair day, all of that. Don't let that stop you if you are someone who's a little more camera shy. I'm not asking you to be a professional model, but it is a really big deal to put your face out there. I totally get that. But I design patterns that I want you to feel fabulous, and I want you to look fabulous, and I want you to share that with other people. So that joy is definitely contagious when you're able to share that in a photo, and I love that. And lastly, I think, is you're going to need to provide feedback. I've said that already, but I wanted to throw that in there as a, you know, actual requirement. You're going to need to provide feedback of some kind. Sometimes it's just emailing the designer. Sometimes there's an actual form. Some designers conduct the whole thing through like a Dropbox or Google Doc type thing where people can add comments. And oftentimes there is a chat maybe going on Instagram. Some people have switched over to Discord because Instagram chats have kind of gotten more complicated. But usually there is some sort of dialoguing with the designer either during or after the pattern test. You send over your photos, you submit that, and then you submit feedback of some kind. So did it come out as expected? How much yardage you used? Difficulty level? Did you make any modifications if that was something that was allowed? Grammar errors, math errors, just suggestions like, hey, I saw that you put this here, but it kind of maybe made more sense to put that here in the pattern. Or maybe it would be really helpful if you had a photo of how you did such and such step, because I was a little confused, maybe needed a visual. And often I ask for feedback on photos and any video tutorials that I've included as well. So yeah, feedback is a huge part. All in all, feedback and photos are kind of what pattern testing is all about, but I hope that I've given you an idea of what pattern testing is. I know I talked really fast, and hopefully this was coherent. I had to re-record a couple parts because I missed stuff, and then my battery died, and it was a whole thing. But hopefully you found this helpful. If you have any additional questions that maybe I didn't cover, or if you want to get in contact with me about pattern testing for any of my stuff, feel free to leave me a comment down below. And like I said, everything is linked below the video, the blog post with all these resources, a bunch of links, a bunch of other tutorials, and all those beautiful pattern tester photos. So go check that out. Follow me on Instagram if you want to test for me. Sign up for my mailing list if you want to test for me. And thank you for watching through this if you did. Whether you want to test for me or you just want to support somebody else in the yarn community, we appreciate you. As designers, like, it's a huge job doing pattern testing, and it's a lot of work on the designer's behalf, and we couldn't, like, it would be impractical for me to make, 8 sweater sizes and all of the yarn options and then take photos of them and do all the yarn, like, but it's not possible. So we need you guys. So thank you very much. If you are a pattern tester, have pattern tested, will pattern test, hope to pattern test, any of that, we appreciate you. And basically, I hope I didn't overwhelm anybody, but if you have attention to detail, you have a half decent phone that can take photos, and you're able to read a pattern, you can be a pattern tester. So thank you for watching, and I hope that you are either part of my pattern test or somebody else's very soon. Thanks for being part of our fiber family, and I will catch you in the next video.